Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know. The cryptic first line of lyrics from Frank Zappa's Andy, a composition that is without a doubt one of Zappa's most creative and original endeavors. Like most of his work, it's near impossible to box into a single style or genre, instead dipping into all of his influences and trademark sounds. Musically, it's a masterclass in his use of the Lydian mode and odd time signatures. But don't let that complexity fool you. Those aspects mixed with his memorable melodies, blues and funk sections, and a great guitar solo combine to create a tune that defines Zappa, and it's become a real fan favorite. Andy was played on multiple tours by different bands, but I'd have to say, my favorite version is still the original, as heard on One Size Fits All. Released June 25th, 1975, One Size Fits All is regarded as one of the best records Zappa ever released. Of course, it helps that it has lots of Zappa fans' favorite band. Who was in that band again? Well, I'm glad you asked. It features George Duke on keyboards, synthesizer, and vocals, Napoleon Murphy Brock on flute, tenor sax, and vocals, Ruth Underwood on percussion, Tom Fowler on bass, and Chester Thompson on drums. We also have an appearance from Johnny Guitar Watson, but we'll talk about that later. One Size Fits All is recognized as one of Zappa's best-sounding records, so we'll have to give the engineers some, including longtime Zappa collaborator Kerry McNabb. And lastly, we can't forget the amazing album art from the one and only Cal Schenkel. It shows a sofa on the front and references to the universe on the back. Some of this record, as you may know, comes from a performance at the KCET TV studio in Los Angeles that was filmed for a TV special, released on Dub Room Special and A Token of His Extreme. There were also sessions at the Caribou Ranch studio in Colorado, but this tune was recorded in January of 1975 at the Record Plant studio in Los Angeles. Although Andy was not the title at the time. It was recorded under the name Is There Anything Good Inside of You? And until it was actually released, Zappa never called this song Andy. At its premiere, he introduced it by saying,
"The first tune is called Something, Anything,"
which changed into,
"First one is called Is There Anything Good Inside of You?"
and later became,
The name of this song is There Anything Good Inside of You? If there is, I really want to know.
But no matter the title, this is such a special song that we're going to examine and talk about. Even those mysterious lyrics. Are they really about the character actor Andy Devine? Well, I'll be honest. I'm not the guy you want explaining Zappa's words to you. Luckily, we have someone who is.
My name is Simon Prentice, and I'm the O Zappa Semantic Scrutinizer.
Simon Prentice worked for Frank Zappa, overseeing the translation of his lyrics into Japanese. But how did that title come about?
The record company I was working with at the time in Japan, checking lyrics on behalf of Frank and Gail, who asked me to get involved with that, said that they needed a little title to authorize my corrections. I suggested to Frank and Gail that maybe the O Zappa Semantic Scrutinizer might be fun, because it just so happens that in Japanese, O Zappa means kind of roughly, approximate, more or less. So the idea that I would kind of more or less be doing the semantic scrutinizing, which obviously dovetails with the central scrutinizer, I thought that might appeal to them, and it kind of did, so it stuck.
Even if you haven't heard of Simon before, you've definitely read his work. He's written liner notes for 3 Zappa albums.
So the first set of liner notes I wrote was for Leather. Much later on, they also asked me to write the notes to The Crux of the Biscuit, the kind of offcuts and outtakes from the Apostrophe sessions.
Continuing on that theme, Simon is included in the new Apostrophe 50th Anniversary box set. And not many people have this privilege, but we have Simon to thank for the inspiration behind a Zappa composition.
Sometime in the early 90s, I showed up at the house. As I entered the States, I'd been used to the procedure where you fill in a sort of a visa. Every time I'd been in prior to that, it had been asking whether you remember the Communist Party or some other bullshit. And suddenly it was, this is the thing that really got me. Have you ever been arrested or convicted for an offense or crime involving moral turpitude or a violation relating to a controlled substance?
Have you ever been arrested or convicted for an offense or crime involving moral turpitude?
But I just thought, Frank's going to love this. I had a spare copy which I brought with me, and I showed it to him, and he was silent for a moment, and he said, "That's album material." I arrived in Frankfurt because he'd asked me to come and witness it and be there and so forth, which was very nice of him. I went to have breakfast with him at the hotel, and he said, "Oh, by the way, you're responsible for one of the tracks tonight." And it was like, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, I put that thing on the Visa waiver to music." I was like, "Oh, geez, wow." I guess it's some kind of a claim to fame.
As a translator and interpreter, Simon has a pretty extensive who's who of clientele. But I can't think of anyone better to handle Frank Zappa's words. Zappa himself once said that Simon is the only translator that he completely trusted. Pretty high praise. So how did this work even come about?
When I met him in the UK when he was doing his tour there, I was interviewing him for Japanese television, which is a long roundabout story in itself, but anyway, as part of that I happened to mention that the lyrics were being translated into Japanese, which I don't think he knew, because in Japan it's kind of a standard procedure. They're not always done very well, and especially in the case of Frank's lyrics, it's no surprise that they're not done very well at all. Later, after the tour had finished, he got back in touch and said, I'd like you to get involved in that process, because if they're not doing a good job, then somebody ought to be looking at it, and I think it ought to be you. So, okay. Obviously, in the case of Frank's lyrics, the trouble is not that if you're not a native speaker, you might not understand them. It's if you're a native speaker, you might understand them. So there was a lot of material that needed just checking for its original meaning, which I was obviously delighted to be able to do, because to have the excuse to ask those questions was really kind of like the best thing I could think of in the entire universe at that point.
Well, so he got to go straight to the source, getting the full meaning of any lyrics he asked about. Even Andy.
Obviously, One Size Fits All is an astonishingly good album, and to my mind there was a conceptual continuity to the whole album that made sense. And one of the things that didn't make sense, however, was Thong Rind, because number one, I'd never heard the phrase, and number two, depending on what it did mean, it might alter the interpretation of the song possibly. So I just threw it out there. I tacked it on the end of some other questions I was asking. And the answer came back, and I was mightily surprised and pleased. Thong rind is the mutated condition of the skin in the region between the toes irritated by friction of a thong sandal. The deeper philosophical meaning of the line refers to that special disappointment one might experience after seeing an attractive woman only to discover she has poorly maintained feet, as if she had just dug her way to the surface performing as an extra in Superman vs. the Mole People. Now, that's just too good, as they say. I mean, come on. Who could have imagined that that was buried in that? It was just a wonderful description, I thought.
But more on that subject later. So Zappa has said that one size fits all, a common phrase, refers to the universe in this context. So what does that have to do with all the material on this album?
When One Size Fits All came out, I saw on the cover a kind of visual representation of the universe creation myth that I remember hearing in the 71 tour, because I actually saw that tour in the UK and the very concert where he got pushed off stage, so that whole event was very much seared in my memory. But I remember that creation myth, and I remember thinking how weird it was. A red sofa appearing in the middle of the universe so that God could sit on it. I'm going, oh my God, that's the story. The way I read the album when I started getting into it was that it was about points of view. You're starting out with, obviously, Inca Roads and the concept that, was very popular at the time, that possibly there'd been some alien interaction with life on Earth, blah, blah, blah. So the alien interaction hypothesis is one of the rabbit holes that you can disappear down, and I think Frank felt it was appropriate to make a puncture in that particular ridiculousness as his starting point. That immediately goes to Can't Afford No Shoes. It's okay for people sitting around in their teenage bedroom to speculate on all this philosophical stuff about where we came from, but actually, for a lot of people, just finding the next meal and something to put on their feet is a far more important and pressing question. So let's not get too grand here. I just thought that was a brilliant switch from one to the other. And then you get Sofa, of course. Maybe doesn't have any conceptual content if you see it in line, but, the punchline's waiting to get you. And then Pajama People. although he's said that he wrote that about musicians who weren't much fun and just spent their life playing chess, I think was the reference. But it obviously has a wider reference just to the idea of people who, they're just getting on with their life and they're not really concerned about these issues that it would behoove them to be interested in, shall we say. We move into Florentine Pogan, which, as we now know, is named after a biscuit. That's just another of those wonderful kind of little flips where he takes something and turns it into something else. So it becomes the story of a poor little rich girl because she's trapped in that sort of privileged environment. Immediately after that, we get to my favorite, which is Evelyn, a modified dog. The poor little poodle stuck in the corner of some nasty suburban room inhabited by pajama people. I think the thing that's most beautiful about this song is the contrast between what we as humans are able to do through language. You can use words to express the finest detail, whereas as a dog, all you've got is arf. On the other hand, as a dog, you're not troubled by all these thoughts. So it's a kind of a sharp bark of enlightenment. It's almost a zen arf. So San Bernardino is the matching pair, in my mind, to Florentine Pogan. So whereas you've got this poor little girl trapped in her privileged misery, you've got this desperate couple of no-hope losers living in a Winnebago. Whatever you might think about the misery of their existence, actually, they're having a great time in their own little way. So let's not be too snooty about it. That, of course, leads now into the song that we are considering as the theme of this particular show. We'll park Andy and go on to the sofa where God reveals his intent in creating the universe and the divine divan and the lost metal money and the smut down the back and everything. So that's the beauty of it. God didn't make the perfect universe. If God made anything at all, he made everything. The crap that surrounds you, surrounds me, the stuff that gets lost and the books that go to die on the shelves, everything. That's all included in the act of creation. So that's the voice of God. So what are we left with? What's missing? The mystery element in the whole melange, as it were, is Andy, because who the fuck is Andy? He doesn't seem to be a character in this whole scenario, particularly apart from where Andy Devine is mentioned. And why Andy Devine? Andy Devine is obviously a character who's known about in the States. I'd certainly never heard of him. I did check him out, and it didn't seem to make much sense that it would be about Andy Devine. But what I did very strongly feel from the flow of the song and what the lyrics as they were, there was some kind of religious theme to it. That obviously made sense in the context of the whole album itself, which, starting with the cover, as we've already said, has some kind of religious / philosophical schema to it. And also, by the way, lest we forget, signed off on an Easter Sunday. Woohoo! So, in the question I asked him about the Thong Rind, I did mention that I'd always consider it the spurious teleological speculation, I think was the phrase I used, which essentially was my way of trying to say it, and that I thought it was about, the purpose of life and God and all that sort of thing. He never corrected me on that, so I assumed that was a viable interpretation, because otherwise he would have told me it wasn't.
Wow, okay. Andy as a religious song. How interesting. It's not like we haven't seen those from Zappa before, although this is certainly different in tone. As we get to each new set of lyrics, we'll hear from Simon again, explaining what it all means. As for now, how about some music? Let's have an overview of all the sections that make up this piece of music, and we'll get into each little detail about all of them later. The main riff that powers this tune like an engine is built on just one note, A. There's a main theme utilizing A Lydian. And a second theme utilizing D Lydian. And then this little funk section, C sharp minor to F sharp 7. Everything else in this tune is pretty much a variation of these parts. As far as how these all work together, I love the way Brett Clement thinks about this piece, which is organizing it into what he calls thematic modules, all of which are pretty closely related. We'll talk about each one, but it's safe to say that the home base of Andy is A, given the two examples I already mentioned, plus the intro. First on the record, we hear a glissando from bells and synthesizer. They come in on a pickup. Bells are so bright in sound, so starting to tune off with them, doing a gliss, is pretty impactful. Like a nice bucket of water to start your day, right? Then on beat 1, the other instruments join. It sounds like gong, organ, synthesizer, electric bass, and drums, before Zappa joins in on the back half on guitar. Now that home base of A is really established because this intro is built just off that one note. Down on the low end, we have synth and bass, both on A, and glissing back and forth up and down an octave. On synth, you can just pitch bend it with a little wheel. You hit it once and move it up on the next bar. On the bass, you can hear him re-strike that A on beat 4 every time, and literally slide up or down the neck to the next A. And finally drums, really pushing here with the 4 on the floor kick drum, meaning each quarter note, and 30 second notes on the hi-hat, which is 8 each beat. So that establishes the rhythm section. On top of that pedal, we have organ holding these glorious sustained pads. First on A sus2 in second inversion, up as fourths with B, E, A. Then it moves up a minor third to C sus2, now D, G, C. Over the A pedal, it's an A sus2, then A minor 11, having the minor third, minor 7th, and 11th in that second voicing. Add in the percussion and what sounds like the inside of an animal shelter, and we have our first 4 bars. And now, one of the most important parts of the song is introduced by the bass and drums now, the Andy riff. Melodically, very simple, right? Just one note of A. It's all about the rhythm here. It's like a Zappa drum rudiment or something. I remember when I first got into Zappa, I couldn't figure out for the life of me what was happening here. It sounded like they were just hitting this note randomly throughout the song. But it's not random, it's a very structured 4-bar phrase. Visually, you can kind of deduce that it starts out rather simply and gradually becomes more advanced and challenging. What I mean is, in the first 2 bars, you can see it's only 8ths and 16ths, whereas in the last 2 bars, it's mostly 16ths and 30 seconds. You can see in bars 1 and 2, the creative thing he does is sort of switch which beats it lands on. So it begins immediately with 2 16ths on beat 1. Beat 2 and 3 are rests, and then an 8th on the and of 4. Then in bar 2, beats 1 and 4 are now rests, while we see an 8th on the and of 2 and 2 16ths on beat 3. Beat 1 of bar 3 is super straightforward, 4 16ths. After a rest on beat 2, beat 3 ramps it up a bit. A 16th on the E, then 2 30 seconds, and a 16th on the So that's 2 30 seconds in the space of 1 16th note. Then I love this last bar because of the symmetry. 2 30 seconds, then 3 16ths on beat 1, then 2 16ths, 2 30 seconds, and 16th. Do you see it? Splitting beat 1 up in half, you get these 2 segments, starting on 1 and then the and. Well, it's like he took the and of beat 1, then places it at the start of beat 2, then took the start of beat 1 and places it on the and of beat 2. And there we have that riff that powers this tune like a train. An interesting thing to note is that Tom Fowler doesn't play this A in the same octave. He keeps switching between A up and down, not unlike how we see in the intro. The good news, for all you bassists looking to learn this tune, is that it's the same pattern every time. I think the easiest way to play this is with the open A and actually staying on the same string. You just go up 12 frets for the higher A. You could see in some Band from Utopia performances that Tom Fowler agreed. By the way, by this time, Tom Fowler had switched from playing the P bass to an alembic. It's got a clear and sharp sound like you wouldn't believe, and using a pick only seems to accentuate its beautiful punch. It's a unique sound I'll attempt to recreate in vain using my dad's Schecter bass. Thanks for letting me borrow that, Dad. So drums unison this on snare, and he still keeps the 4 on the floor thing, but a really important nuance is this little 16th he does in the kick sometimes. On the of beat 3's here, here, and here, and then on beat 1 here in bar 2. Notice it only happens when it would not double the snare at the same time. It keeps it from feeling too march-like, I guess, and gives it some bounce. Underneath this, the synth bass just holds an A. And Zappa's part on the guitar comes in now. It's very simple, just 2 power chords, A to B, and he's sliding them back and forth while using the vibrato bar. It's 2 guitars in stereo, one pan left, and the other right, playing the same part. While that happens, the bells tremolo, or rapidly repeat, A to B, with more glisses in between. And organ finally provides something more than a root or a fifth, now playing triads, A to B. So just in these 4 bars, the back half of this intro, he establishes the harmonic rhythm that we're going to see through a lot of this tune. And so now we have module 1 of 5, A Lydian. And in so many of Zappa's compositions, we see movement between 2 major chords a whole step apart. Brett Clement refers to this as the Lydian-Mixolydian oscillation. The reason being, both of the scales contain the same notes, but starting from their respective roots are 2 different modes. In this case, A Lydian to B Mixolydian. As Brett notes, although Zappa claims to loathe chord progressions, his modal music does feature a small number of diatonic chord progressions, which usually come in the form of repeated 2-chord oscillations. Zappa states, "I like to have one tonal center that stays there, or possibly with a second chord that varies off the main tonal center." So they're usually ascending from Lydian up a whole step to Mixolydian. For example, in Inca Roads, Dog Breath, or Outside Now.
I can't wait to see what it's like on the outside now. I can't wait to
Along with plenty of others. But of course, we can see them reversed. Mixolydian down to Lydian, as in Punky's Whips,
I can do it, Punky. It's rehearsing today. I just go over and hear the play.
or Carolina Hardcore Ecstasy. Also along with many others. And of course, this section was prone to many changes, before and after the record. As it was played on the first tour it premiered, it featured a guitar riff, as heard here. Jeff Simmons arpeggiates an A sus2 and also adds the 4th, D, in there. And that continues in the second bar, until it switches to B major on the last 2 beats. So it's really the same harmonically from what it ended up as, still the A to B progression. What's really interesting is the D natural to D sharp in this riff. First as the sus4, played with these bluesy pull-offs, then into a full B major arpeggio. On the one recording we have from the actual one-size-fits-all band, Zappa just plays an A sus2, and there's no more guitar riff here. In 79, the form is the same as it is on the record, only instead of A sus2 to C sus2 in the harmony over the pedal, it stays A7 sus4 the whole time. That's an A7 sus4 up in fourths, as A, D, G. As it was played in the Fall 80 band, we're done with those sus chords. The form is still the same, but it's immediately into the A to B. And lastly, in 88, we still see the A to B, only the form is now different. After these 4 bars, you just go straight into the main theme. Speaking of which, let's finally listen and talk about that main Andy theme. So this is just a classic Zappa melody. Pound for pound, one of his best, you could certainly argue. To tell the truth, we may still be underestimating the significance of this melody. The main theme of Andy not only epitomizes the entire song, it almost perfectly captures the essence of Zappa's music altogether. I know that's a strong statement, but stay with me for a second. It's got all the features there. It's got a quirky little odd-numbered tuplet, it's Lydian, it has an element of the blues in there, and actually, it's very guitaristic. The odd-numbered tuplet is a quintuplet, 5 16th notes in the space of 4 16th notes, lasting 1 beat. A thing to remember is that even though Zappa is very prone to these odd-numbered tuplets, a lot of times they're actually in the space of a beat, which makes it easier to handle. Look at Montana, for example, which has all 5s on the beats. You can make of this what you will, God knows I examine things too deeply, but I do find it genuinely interesting that he uses this shape, up, down, 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 on a lot of his quintuplets. There's examples like Peaches, Dog Breath, Broken Hearts, Florentine Pogan, and plenty of others. So there's our quintuplet, a creative rhythmic figure, but not completely obnoxious to deal with. And you can see the symmetry here. I consider it basically 2 phrases, like a question and answer. Each phrase starts on beat 4, then a dotted half. Question, answer, question, then answer with a slight variation. As you can see, another 16th and 8th on the E and of beat 1. So that's great framework. So let's look at what's happening melodically. We can take the time and name each note as it relates to A Lydian, like sharp 4, 5, sharp 4 again, but that's a bit surface level here. Take this melody outside of its harmonic context. This clearly is outlining a B major idea. The D sharps and Bs are repeated here. The B in particular is really emphasized on strong beats. So this is what I want to pose as a central aspect of Andy. In the Lydian context, he favors what would be the 2 chord melodically. So in this case, it's like he took this B major lick, what would be the 2 of A Lydian, and copy and pasted it over an A pedal. This is very important to Zappa's music and the piece, and we're going to encounter this a lot more going forward. Now you may have noticed that D natural, a little variation in the second phrase. That's not in A Lydian or B major, right? So how does that work? Well, this is the blues element Zappa introduces. The blues has some flexibility with pitch, specifically around the minor and major thirds, the 4th and the 5th, and the flat 7 and major 7. Jeff Todd Titan calls these the E, G, and B complexes, using those note names as they relate to C. Think of when you hit a minor third and bend between that and the major third, or you hit the 4th and bend between that and the 5th, giving what's usually called the blue note. So essentially we have these flexible notes, and a flexible third is precisely what we see in Andy. We've seen nothing but D sharps here up until now, and with that D natural, we still have to look at it as if the melody is in B and not A. It's not like he's dipping from A Lydian back to A major. It's really the minor third of B here after we've seen the major third. And this D natural gives us the bluesy effect, as it's simulating B blues in the melody, even from one quick note. It's certainly not out of the ordinary for Zappa to treat the Mixolydian in the Lydian-Mixolydian oscillation as a blues scale in his improvisations. It is a little bit of tension, but the fact that it's just the 16th before it returns to B means it's swiftly resolved. I think this is just such an awesome sound. Between the bit of rhythmic complexity and the sort of pristine and bright Lydian sound, the blues element is a really great contrast and some necessary grease to this equation. Now, continuing the topic of Zappa and the guitar on this theme, I may be biased, but I think a guitar player would be way more likely to come up with that than another instrument. Well, let's go through how to play it. So the quintuplet can be played all on one string in one motion. All you have to do is pick the very first note on this D sharp on the 4th fret of the B string, and you can hammer on and pull off the rest, pressing on and pulling off the fingers. This makes the double B notes here make some more sense, as you can pull off that last C sharp onto the B and then just restrike that open B. In the only actual video evidence I could find of Zappa playing the theme, you can kind of make out that he plays it that way. At least, we can be sure he hits that open B, as you can see his hand moving around during that, meaning he's not fretting the note. So hammer-ons, pull-offs, and open strings. Definitely guitaristic so far. In the second phrase, there's another open string, E. So you can just play that all on the E string now. A on the 5th fret, open string, and then B on the 7th fret. It's subtle, but the majority of the time, you can hear Zappa slide up into that high B. On the second go of this phrase, it's usually not slid into, and the reason is that he usually slides between the B and the D natural. Again, something we can observe from Zappa actually playing this. Too bad there isn't more video, unless they did a version at the Discreet special with Jeff Simmons. Although it sounds like he isn't completely articulating it that way every time, I would say this is as close as we can get to the quote-unquote most accurate way to play this. Now we get the theme again, but we're adding two things, vocals and another guitar harmony. The vocals just double the theme, again double tracked. We see it harmonized in diatonic 6th and 5ths. And to finish the line, he goes to 3rds, with a 4th in between with A, as if it's A major to B major again. And when he slides that B up a minor 3rd to D, the harmony line copies exactly, sliding from D sharp up a minor 3rd to F sharp and back. And now, with everything else back in. There's really no differences here on the first theme between bands, so now we'll move on to the next section.
Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know. Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know. Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know. Is there?
And now we have our very first lyrics of the tune. Remember, when we had last discussed the meaning of Andy, Simon suggested that it's a religious song. So, How do these first lines of lyrics fortify that suggestion?
Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know, would seem to be a question directed at God if you were a skeptic. You know, if you somehow began questioning your faith, and we know that Frank was brought up as a Catholic, so this might be something that he had asked himself, or it could be a question more generally that people would be drawn to if they were questioning religious belief or faith. So that was the context in which I read it the first time I heard it. Not in the detail that I later began to understand it or was able to confirm it, but that seemed to me that's what it was about. One of the earlier questions I asked him when I interviewed him the second time, I wanted to know about his journey with Catholicism and how he sort of escaped that. He told me at the time that it was because he started reading about Zen.
Well, I was having a great time being a Catholic until I was about 18. I was, totally serious about it. But I just looked around and started comparing preachment to practice. And when you see that it doesn't add up, the logical mind would say, "Why, this is not right. It's not working." Probably the main thing that changed my mind about all of this was finding out about Zen. And at the point that I read anything about it, it seemed that was the only thing that seemed to make sense to me. For a while I thought, well, I wonder from a Zen point of view whether there was a way to rationalize Catholicism. And I worked on that philosophically for about a year and finally came to the conclusion that this is not right.
It seems to me that in a sense, is exactly what Andy is about. That is that wrestling process. It's like, really? There's this system of belief that I've been brought up with, that I've been led to believe is the truth, and now, wait a minute, here's another point of view that tells me it doesn't need to be like that. This is all bullshit, maybe. Or, is there another way of understanding this? I don't know. And in his own words, it took him a year of philosophical sort of wrestling with the thing. In fact, in another little snippet, he actually told me one day we were sitting in the kitchen, he told me that he'd been so serious about it that he wanted to be a monk, which was an interesting point because I too at one point had thought about that as a career alternative, although not for very long. And as he pointed out when we were talking about it, he said the thing about being a monk is you don't get to wear shoes like that, and pointed at my shoes because I happened to be wearing a pair of sort of semi-funky footgear at the time. So it's not in any way out of the part to consider that this was something that represents a journey that he himself went on.
Alright, what a great start here. A questioning of religious belief or faith. Makes sense. Not necessarily the denial of, but at the very least questioning, isn't out of line for Zappa. If there was anything religious Zappa readily admitted to, he said many times he was a devout pagan. And as with everything else, this probably ties into his ideas of the big note, but we'll get into that some more later. For now, back to the music. So this part, which almost seems like a verse section, seems pretty strange, huh? It doesn't really seem like George Duke is singing any coherent melody, and it randomly starts and stops with a strange harmony in between. Well, for now, let's ignore the odd time signatures. I promise that'll make sense later. First, let's check out an early version of Andy. Okay, this is the same section, but do you recognize that it has a melody? They're actually singing notes instead of Speak singing it. And that melody shows up again later, twice. First instrumentally, and then with the words. Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is it something that you can understand?
Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is it something that you can understand? Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is it something that you can understand? Do you know what I'm really telling you?
Well, this is the second main theme of Andy. Okay, now we have something to stand on at least. Let's see if we can just grasp this phrase. So those last two sixteenths are definitely part of the previous 4/4 bar. It's a pickup here. But you can even ignore the time signatures for a minute. Let's think even smaller. There's a clear pattern of 3 and 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, right? So these phrases fit neatly as 5 16 bars, counted as 3, 2. And that last bar, after starting with a grouping of 3 once again, these all feel to me like they're grouped in 2s, which you can see is 4 groups of 2s. So what do you get when you take 8, 4 groups of 2s, and add 3, 11, 16, which is our last bar of this phrase? Okay, so that's not so bad, right? Now, the melodic content. We have 5 notes here: E, F sharp, G sharp, A, and B. Well, that's the first 5 notes of the E major scale. Factoring in the E arpeggio and the emphasis around that note, I think it's okay to say that this is an E major lick. But just like in the first theme, we have a major lick with the flat 7 in the bass. Or if you're thinking of it the other way, a root with its major 2 in the melody, which means that we have D in the bass and E major melody, giving us D Lydian, our second module of the tune. Between module 1 of A Lydian and module 2 of D Lydian, there's only a 1-note difference, D natural, which is the root of the second module. Stuff like that certainly makes transitions easier. Zappa certainly likes this little combination of notes, like a major triad with a second in there. You all know this part of the Black Page that has not only the same exact notes, but same harmony as well. So between the 2 main themes of Andy, you can compare and contrast pretty easily. Purely melodically, they're both relatively simple. First B major and then E major. Both see some rhythmic complexity, the first theme having the quintuplet, and the second having odd time signatures. And then finally, you can just move the bass down the step, and they both have Lydian. We're really unlocking a lot of Zappa's Lydian tendencies so far. This is really exciting. Okay, so on the record, all George Duke does is really follow the contour of the theme. He sort of speaks singing it and just following the shape as the melody goes.
Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know. Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know. Is there anything?
Alright, awesome. So we understand this phrase now, but we can't stop there. Remember, there's all these strange pauses in the middle. So how in the world do we count it like it's on the record? We may have to look elsewhere. Roxy and elsewhere. Okay, but do you all know the story behind Don't You Ever Wash That Thing? It started off as a pretty straightforward tune. But as Ruth Underwood explains, Zappa made the suggestion to insert 5-beat drum fills to split the theme. Drummer Ralph Humphrey suggested the great idea of having silence during those gaps.
Don't you ever wash that thing?
Oh, yeah.
With the rests?
Yes.
Do you remember? I remember the day that happened.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
that originally.
There were 5 beats
Yeah, 5
of
beats in
silence.
between
Yeah,
each
5
thing,
beats,
right.
yeah.
Someone got the idea. I thought it was you, Ralph. Like, oh, hey, let's just not do anything there. And then, oh, yeah, let's try that. And Frank was doing his, with the mouth open.
Right.
Yeah, the
Like
one
that.
leg.
And it just
Yeah.
stuck.
Yeah.
And it was hard. It was hard to play that. But I actually remember that day. I remember where I was standing and how you looked and all of that. And I thought, this is amazing. And it just stays like that.
So now, when you add those 5 beats, it becomes... My theory is that Zappa applies that same idea here, and it helps that they're roughly from the same period. I'm really willing to bet that Andy started off with this normal, no in-between breaks version, and then Zappa ended up adding in those beats of silence, as in Don't You Ever Wash That Thing, to really make this part unique. So what are the beats? Is it 5 each time as well? We can try and count either the completely silent version, or the version as it appears on One Size Fits All, but there's an arrangement in between that makes it really easy, if you can excuse the sound quality for a second. Check it out. Wow, okay, that makes our lives a lot easier. You can hear a drummer playing the silent beats in between on a tom. Let's listen again slowly and see how many beats there are. so not all of them are 5, like Don't You Ever Watch That Thing. In order, we see 3, 7, 3, 3, 5, 3, 7. So only 3 different odd-numbered beats, 3, 5, and 7. Is there a pattern here? Well, there was really no meaningful connection that I could find. This part, I assume, Zappa chose at random. So, we have a basic understanding of how to count and feel this part. And just visually, it would probably make more sense to group it in less time signatures. Something like this, I think, would convey it the most accurately. But the phrase itself you can still feel in its 2s and 3s. And then when we break it up, I would just learn those numbers and count the beats there. So I'm really not even thinking about the time signature during this part. You just kind of have to learn the numbers and then feel it. Like so.
Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know. Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know. Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know.
We're so close to getting everything down about this part. So we had the arrangement with silence. And then the arrangement where they literally play the beats. And then there's an arrangement by the same one-size-fits-all band that's getting a little closer to the record version. Let's listen.
Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know. Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know. Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know.
So it seems Zappa just keeps adding on, right? It's so fun to see how this tune evolves during the tours. Okay, so this time Chester plays 30 seconds on each beat, switching the cowbells. And George Duke hits this chord on the Rhodes over it. Although he switches to the ride cymbal after the 4th time. And that's how it ends up on the record, each time, until that 7-beat fill at the end. Which, by the way, makes sense given that Chester's kit was so large. He had more than enough toms to do that. But what's that chord? Well, it's an A augmented triad. Augmented triads are built completely in major thirds. So we have A augmented 3 times, then a step up to B augmented, back down to A augmented, then down to A flat augmented, and finally G augmented. So why would he pick that harmony? Well, over the D pedal on this theme, it's almost as if it's going 1 to 5, right? D sus2 to A augmented, back and forth. And that augmented triad also just lends that unique, sort of mysterious and unstable sound that makes sense for this section and how he breaks the phrase up. The only thing is, that's not how it ends up on the record. Instead of a triad, we get a 4-note harmony, E over C, or C augmented major 7. It has an augmented triad in it, with C, E, and G sharp, and then a major 7 with B. Why the change? Well, I'm not sure there's any particular reason. E over C could at least make sense because the melody is outlining E, right? And then you just drop the bass down a whole step from D to C, and voila, you get the spooky chord. It follows the same form as the previous arrangement, moving up and down the same way to F over C sharp, although technically E sharp over C sharp, and down to D sharp over B and D over A sharp. Anyhow, you can see how Zappa creatively keeps progressing this farther and farther, first with the phrase itself that shows up later, then he breaks it up Don't You Ever Watch That Thing style, then adding in percussion and a chord hit in between. After One Size Fits All, it's played basically the same as the record. But I have one last thing to mention on this. There's this really great contrast between the vocal part and the instrumental chords. Over that D sus2, George Duke is singing, bass is pedaling the root, drums hit the toms. It's a very earthy sound that grounds it even with the strange spoken sung melody. When we hit those E over C chords, it changes the synth bass hitting the root, while organ and bells have this airy, almost ethereal sound on top of it. The drums hit the cymbals. There's such a great disparity between these two parts that makes the whole section really interesting.
Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know. Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really want to know.
Now the phrase has been broken up entirely and played 3 times. We've only just arrived at the last 2 sixteenths, since our last word before the 7-beat drum fill was no. So we have another is there, but they're not exactly in time. It's really just 2 hits that are cued, is being one, and there being the other. They have pauses on them, or fermatas as we call them. The second has the band come in though. Bass hits a B, the drum rolls on snare, and piano arpeggiates a B dominant chord. Why B? Well, it's the 5th of our next part, another rearrangement of the second theme.
Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really wanna know. Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really wanna know. Really wanna know.
Wow, what a change. We've gone straight from this heavy odd time thing to a much slower, greasy blues, now in E. That big old B dominant chord makes sense now, right? It was the 5 heading to 1. E blues is now our 3rd module of this tune. You may notice I have 8 notes written there instead of 7. This isn't exactly an octatonic scale though. I'm just using blues as an umbrella term. It's not strictly the blues scale or Mixolydian or whatever. It's a combination of the notes in the riff and what Johnny sings that gives this collection. Either way, from module 1 of A-Lydian, it's a 2-note difference, G and D. From the previous module of D-Lydian, it's only a 1-note difference with G. You don't need me to tell you the one huge difference between these sections though. That's not George Duke singing anymore. That's the man, the myth, the legend, Johnny Guitar Watson. Who better out of anyone to sing this blues section than Johnny Guitar Watson? His unique style was a huge influence on lots of musicians, especially Zappa, saying he used to listen to him all the time, and that he admired his nasty, aggressive tone, and how speech influenced his rhythm was. But it was really Johnny's record 3 Hours Past Midnight that hit Zappa the most, saying that inspired him to become a guitarist. Zappa said he would sit around and try to play that solo, but the difficulty was in the rhythm, noting that it wasn't straight up and down. And when Zappa appeared on the radio show Castaway's Choice, where artists picked their 10 desert island songs, you can bet what was on there.
You've chosen Johnny Guitar Watson, 3 Hours Past Midnight. Was this one of your heroes?
Yeah, I thought that what Johnny was doing on the guitar was something very special.
And if you were to lose 9 of these recordings, Frank, which one would you choose to keep?
3 Hours Past Midnight.
When Zappa was recording Andy at the record plant, Johnny also happened to be working in another part of the studio. George Duke, knowing Johnny, introduced him to Zappa. Johnny said that the first time he met Zappa, Zappa played the solo of one of his songs, note for note. So you know Zappa would make the most out of this opportunity, asking him to be on One Size Fits All. Thankfully, Johnny said yes, and was credited with flambe vocals on Andy and San Bernardino. What you may not know, however, is that Johnny sings on 3 tunes on One Size Fits All. Zappa mentioned that Johnny also does the bass vocal on Florentine Pogan, uncredited on the album. But Zappa now had his hero on the tune. So this is a pretty unique structure fitting this blues in. It's completely different in rhythm, harmony, and melody from what we've seen previously. But there is one common aspect. We have the same lyrics. Style change is obviously a huge part of Zappa's music, but taking something, even just one aspect, and keeping it constant while deviating around it is so common. How he uses this in Andy makes me think of Alien Orifice, where he has a melody and changes played in a jazz style, then he presents it again as a rock guitar solo with the same changes, and presents it one last time played as reggae, with the same melody, but this time with alternate changes. And that's what I think we're getting here, probably to a more extreme degree. So I think it's really satisfying for Zappa to be able to, quote-unquote, get away with this type of thing. Also, it's just a nice change from the really intense part of this section. Okay, so a standard blues is made up of 3 changes. 1, E in this case, 4, A, and 5, B. You can see though that instead of returning back to 1 after 5, it ends on B and we get another fermata. And Johnny's vocal harmony is pretty standard E blues stuff, along with the typical question and answer form. What is interesting is his phrasing. Listen to how he stretches it over the beat, sometimes behind, sometimes straight. Remember, not up and down. His vocal style is just like his and Zappa's guitar playing in that regard.
Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really wanna know. Is there anything good inside of you?
But anyways, this is a section that we're feeling as 12/8, meaning it's like 4/4 in that it has 4 overall beats, but each one is divided into 3/8. We call these compound meters as opposed to simple meters, which divide into 2. So we're counting this as 1 and a, 2 and a, 3 and a, 4 and a. You can listen to Chester closely and he'll show you. Eighths all on the ride cymbal, kicks on beats 1 and 3, and snares on beats 2 and 4. It's backed up by guitar and bass supplying the harmonic information with these riffs, although listen closely. As played on the record, bass and guitar are not playing the same riff. On bass, it's essentially just a walking bass line. We see chord tones, chromaticism, and some rhythmic accents. This isn't some written thing. It's something Fowler would improvise because the section is basic enough. So what's happening in that guitar part anyways? He's basically playing the arpeggio as well, but you can see it's a little more uniform than Fowler's improvised line. Something really important to notice though, in the second bar on that A7, it's pretty hard to hear, but all that's happening is instead of going down to the 5th from that 6th like he did the first time, now he bends it up a step to G and back down. The funny thing is, none of the bands play it that way afterwards. They play it as if the pattern continues like it's played in the first bar, right?
Is there anything good inside of you? If there is, I really wanna know. Is there any...
It's funny that it changed like that, but it really does make sense. For one, it's a bit difficult to hear in the mix right there, and 2, and this goes for the bass doubling the line as well, consistency is not a bad thing. A little last interesting thing here is that everyone makes this same hit on the rhythm section on beat 4 over the A7. That rhythm comes from the original way it was sung before Johnny Guitar Watson. You can see they were just accenting from the original feel. My guess is Johnny came in to do the vocals after the fact, and they may have even recorded the original ones before Zappa ever met Johnny, and he probably scrapped that when Johnny came in to sing. So we have the original arrangements with a written vocal line, one size fits all with an improvised vocal line, and then every arrangement after continues the improvised vocal line, but with bass and guitar doubling. But we hold on this last B7 sharp 9 until we get to... So that's just the main theme again, this time with the lyrics, something, anything. Well, what do we think that's all about?
Just sort of like an indication of desperation, right? If I'm a practicing Catholic, so into this to the point that I'm actually thinking of being a monk, then the idea that the whole thing actually is a crock of shit is not going to be appealing to you on the first run through. You're going to want to hope that you just didn't waste 18 years of your life or however long it was. So something, anything, come on, can I have something? Give me something here to work with. You know, otherwise I look like an idiot. So I think that's all it is. It's just an index of desperation.
In other words, please hear my plea. It's worth mentioning that this part has led to speculation that Andy is really about Todd Rundgren, due to his 1972 album, Something Anything. Besides that, there are some loose connections. Miss Christine, the member of the GTOs who appeared on the cover of Hot Rats in 1969, dated Rundgren, and appeared inside the sleeve of his 1970 album Run. Rundgren was also slated to open for Zappa at the Forum on New Year's Eve in 1975, but apparently had to cancel. Rundgren covered Camarillo Brillo in recent years with his own set of lyrics. But I couldn't find any mention of Rundgren from Zappa. So probably not the theory we want to run with, considering there's not a lot of meat on that bone. So because we're back at the main theme, that means we're back at Module 1 of A Lydian, our second appearance. And this is the first time we're hearing Napoleon Murphy Brock. He's singing the something, while George Duke answers with anything. Have you noticed any other differences? I'll give you a hint. Look at where the theme starts now. Do you remember how it was before? Well, when it originally came in, it started on beat 4. The quintuplet was sort of a pickup. And now it starts right here on 1. And there's no Andy riff under there. Bass plays A between 2 octaves, then slides up the neck and does that again, an octave from the original spot. The way he slides up and accents the of beat 4 is to align with the melody, which drums also accent. Add in some organ, bells, and Zappa playing the line again, and there you have it. Now after that, they all continue playing the theme now with no vocals. The harmony part Zappa played the first time is back, along with another one. And with this new harmony, he's just filling out the last part, making it a full 3-part harmonized line, all in A Lydian. After that, we're back to the riff. Zappa hits the first 2 16ths. We hear another gong, this one a bit smaller from the first one. And there's all these little percussive doodads, like tempo blocks and castanets. There's lots of space here he can now fill and do this textural thing with the percussion, which is really just a Varese impression, but it works so great here. Although with Zappa, they're usually written in with very specific and demanding rhythms, like in his modern classical pieces. I think he probably just told Ruth, go nuts here, giving directions where he needed to, instead of giving out an actual written part. And with apologies to Fernie Howe, they pretty much end up with the same result for our ears anyway. Andy is not the only place where Zappa uses random percussion for texture. What about It Must Be a Camel? Or Egyptian Strut. Shake Your Booty has great examples, not even counting the growl, like Flakes.
I'm a moron and this is my wife. She's frosting a cake with a paper knife. All what we got here's American made. It's a little bit...
And although it's not analog, and most of the time it's rhythmically in time, there are some great syndrome examples on that record as well. Another thing we get in this section is piano fills by George Duke. They happen in bars 2 and 4 of the riff each time. First up we have this lick. Clearly B major, right? With the B and D sharp, but also, it sounds like a guitar bend. This is the Charlie Brown lick. Then we have fill number 2. Again, he's thinking B major, right? He makes a really nice melody with these triads. Then we have fill number 3. Basically the same fill as last time, although the left-hand part is way more pronounced. And then our last fill. Simple enough, just A to B, but with a catchy rhythm. Back in the very first arrangement of Andy in the Jeff Simmons band, Zappa would have them both play every second and fourth bar. Remember that intro guitar riff? We'd hear that on guitar and clav. So you can see the development. It makes sense when Simmons left that the band evolved until this was just a spot for George to play fills. So now we head to a new part, this funk section, for lack of a better term. Let's listen.
Show me a sign, if you don't mind. Show me a sign, if you don't mind. Show me a sign, if you don't mind. Show me a sign, if you don't mind.
Show me a sign if you don't mind. The smoking gun, if you like, but this is about God. That is a classic religious question. I mean, it pops up all over the Bible. You know, in the Old Testament, the New Testament, the people whose faith is tested by God, you know, because he visits some crap on them and they're wondering whether they deserve all this. And it's like, show me a sign if you don't mind.
It's true. There are countless verses all over the Bible about showing or seeking signs.
If you don't mind is obviously the Zappa edition that is just sort of gives it that beautiful levity. But show me a sign is desperation of a mind confronting the fact that faith might be based on a pack of lies, basically. So come on, again, it's something, anything. Show me a sign if you don't mind. I love that.
So, asking for God to show a sign that there's anything good inside of him. We're starting to understand that Andy is really about a crisis of belief. So now, on this new section, we have C# minor 7 to F# 7. How do we get there? Well, as I described in my video on Zappa's favorite chord progression, he loves stepwise root movement, meaning in that the main theme we have this A to B thing happening, right? And if you're in A Lydian and you end on B, instead of going down a step to A, you can go up a step to our closest note of C#. C# minor is firmly in that A Lydian tonality, but what about the F# 7? The third of F# is A#, so that doesn't fit. Well, this is a new module, C# Dorian. A# is the major sixth of C#, so it's a little bit of a change, but hey, honestly still pretty close. All of it is, really, if you take a look at it. This module is a 3-note difference from the previous module of E, but it's still only a 1-note difference from A Lydian. These modulations become easier when there's a lot in common, right? Well, check out the melody of this section. It's pretty simple, and it starts out a lot like the main theme. You can see both have D#, E, D#, C#.
Show me a sign if you don't mind. Show me a sign if you don't something.
So he does veer off, you know, but it's all pretty closely related. In the rhythm section, there's nothing really crazy happening. We have Zappa, still on 2 guitars, strumming the changes. The guitar pan right is playing a pattern like this, and the guitar pan left is playing a pattern like this. Put them together and you get this. It's a lot of fun to hear Zappa in that funky rhythm guitar context. We really don't get enough of that. Tom Fowler has this line that he repeats throughout, and drums just keep time. So, altogether, they sound like this. Fairly standard stuff. What is interesting is the synth line that comes in the 4th bar. This type of part he's playing is called a background. In pop and funk music, it's a part that's played by a horn section a lot of times, which makes it perfect for the 88 band. What kind of purpose does a background serve musically? Well, think about this. We're getting a lot of just rhythm section here, so a new instrument playing something different is always going to be welcome. It keeps things from getting stale. The synth is a new color, which is a great addition, while literally every instrument is playing the same exact part. It also adds a bit of rhythmic variety. It's usually something that doesn't get in the way of the other instruments, and instead adds to what's going on. In this case, it adds some great accents with those 2/16ths on the beats. You can hear all the bands after this would accent this pretty hard, adding some variety and really driving the groove on the back half of the section. The other thing that makes this such a brilliant little background is that it really imitates the arrangement of a horn section. What I mean is, a lot of times you can separate the higher register instruments and the lower ones. Like you can hear trumpets, alto, and tenor saxes do one thing, while trombone and bari sax do another, for example. You can see that sort of independence here. Again, it's hard to tell from the recording, which is really just me making excuses for my bad ears. But I think he probably recorded the right hand and the left hand separately, the high part and the low part, mainly because of the pitch bends in the top line. But anyways, we get another cool pitch bend moment, as he hits a chord on the and of beat 1 and gradually raises the pitch into the next section. It sounds like a sus2 voiced in fourths, D sus2. As far as different arrangements, there's only one little difference. In the versions before One Size Fits All, there was a little unison riff. Check it out. It only happens over the F sharp. It's just ascending the scale and skipping the note of E. Everything else was played just about as it ended up on the record, with the full synth background only appearing there though. Speaking of which, remember how I mentioned it ended with a pitch bend on a D sus2 chord? Harmonically, that D sus2 is an anticipation as we move to the next section. Let's check it out. Recognize that? It's the second theme, just like we heard already, but now instrumentally, and not broken up between phrases. Nice thing is that we've already done our work on this, so we can really just talk about the arrangement here. Although I'd like to point out, the C-sharp Dorian thing that we saw before to now D Lydian, it's like black napkins, right? One of Zappa's favorite modal center switches. So it sounds like piano and bells are taking the melody for the first time, while guitar, bass, and drums emphasize that rhythm. Then they drop out, and now bass takes the melody, with what I think is organ doubling it an octave down. In case you actually needed to hear this, yes, this is wonderfully difficult, even with a pick. Zappa is strumming a full D sus2, and as we land on D after this 10-16 bar, the distorted guitars come back in and hit a C power chord, giving us C over D. Then simply enough, he slides it up and down from C to D. And now we're back to the first main theme, which is the same as the others except for the arrangement. This is our third appearance now of A Lydian, the first module, and we'll stay here even as we get to a new section, the bridge. It sounds a bit like Chester was surprised by this section happening here. He's still on the ride for a bit and is accenting the Andy riff. Although we hear something different in the bass now. We have the bridge riff. How is it different? Well, notice that it's all 16ths and 8ths, no 30-seconds now. So a bit of a calmer rhythm, perhaps. It starts the same way though, 2 16ths on beat 1, but then it's 2 16ths on beat 3. Now see in bar 2 of the main Andy riff, we get an 8th and 2 16ths starting on the and of 2. Well, if you take that rhythm and start it on the and of 1, that's what we have in the variation riff. And then like the previous bar, we have 2 16ths on beat 3 again. These two bars seem like a complete phrase. He then just repeats it. The third bar is the same as the first, and the first 2 beats of bar 4 are the same as bar 2. It's got enough going on that it's not boring, but still simple enough to give a really great contrast from the main riff. And same with this melody that comes in, right? Instead of the rhythmically complex first theme, we get this melody that's very direct and straightforward. No quintuplets or even 16ths. It starts with a pickup of 2 quarters, E and D sharp. 2 important notes in that first theme. Then we get a little different by landing on G sharp, the major 7th of A. A note he hasn't really emphasized much. He keeps the rhythm by putting in 2 quarters again on beats 3 and 4, but this time the contour is the opposite, up from B to C sharp, intervals 2 to 3. Then it lands on G sharp as a dotted quarter, then F sharp. Then it just repeats after that. Really nice simple melody for sure, but is there anything deeper we can look into here? Well, we know this riff is a variation of the main one, and so far it seems this melody takes a little bit from the first one as well. And one thing we did not mention is the harmonic rhythm, that A to B progression. Check out this earlier version, and I think it'll help show what I'm talking about. As Jeff Simmons plays the melody on harmonica, 2 things jump out to me. First, you probably notice that they're playing both versions of the riff on top of each other. Now this is just my opinion, but I would say it was a very good decision from Zappa to stop doing that. Second, you can hear George Duke playing the changes behind him, hitting A major 7, and then when it gets to F sharp, he plays B major. Makes sense, since the melody note is the 5th of that chord. So now you can see that this whole thing is really just a take on the first theme, A to B, but much more toned down. A simpler riff, a simpler melody, and the changes last for 2 bars instead of 1 each. One last little note on this. I think this is a really important section because so much of Zappa's music is big, and bigger, in many aspects, which is really great. But sometimes he can make it feel like you're going 100 miles down the highway for a very long time. But this part is a great reduction. We've had all these very energetic and very dense sections. So to be able to now stop and breathe and sort of collect yourself is really great. A result of this more intimate setting is that it gives more meaning to each note, hence why this melody can be sparse. Okay, so after organ and piano, guitars enter. So we're back to the main riff again. We can ramp up the intensity here, because it's earned after taking it down dynamically. Okay, so this melody happens basically 3 times once we get back to the main Andy riff here. That was the first. Then the second time in these last 2 bars of the phrase, he changes it a bit. Instead of landing on our normal dotted quarter 8th half on beat 1 here, we get a quintuplet. And what do you know? It has the same contour as the main theme, our same up then down 3 times. So you know he's already established G sharp to F sharp, at least in the main voice. Now this time the quintuplet starts on F sharp, up to G sharp, down again to E, then C sharp, and finally landing back on its starting note of F sharp. The third go-around of this melody starts the same way as always rhythmically, with its 2 quarters. Only this time, the main melody starts down a 5th from where it was originally. Now it starts A G sharp, the same down a step thing as it begins, but now it goes down a 3rd to E. This holds for a full bar. Then on beat 1 of the next bar, we get something very interesting. All of a sudden we hear these random sounds, like everyone is banging on their instruments. Well, it's a bit of organized chaos here. It lasts for 2 beats exactly, so it's all 30-second notes, or 8 notes per beat. Then you're right back to the A G sharp part of the melody. So throwing in a bit of coordinated craziness is definitely part of Zappa's bag. At its simplest, sometimes we have sections where it devolves into free time madness. Something like Stinkfoot, where anyone can play whatever they want for any rhythmic value. And this goes on until there's a short cue to get us back to form. Then sometimes we get a little more organization, where rhythm and contour is notated, like the famous approximate. Advancing this concept even more, approximate shows up in two of Zappa's most beautiful pieces, working as the rough and ugly counter in Inca Roads.
I kept telling Corey that in St. Louis I ain't never smelled nothing like that in my life. It was very, very different. The car went on anyway, as much as and children.
And Village of the Sun. So it's working on two levels, as its own compositional idea, and then how it contrasts as chaotic sound with the beautiful sections of music, just like in Andy. And then we move to its most organized, where everything is notated, but we're still getting the same effect. The best example of this is Dupree's Paradise. George Duke sets the tune up with this intervallic pattern, and then the band grooves over E major for 8 bars. But before they get into a really pretty, almost soaring E Lydian melody, there's one bar of 4/4 madness. This is a completely written bar of music. It's the same lick every time, but composed to seem like it's random. It's chromatic saturation. Basically lots of chromatic notes in a row with displacement, but not a tone row. Now Zappa must have loved this lick so much, because it became something that could get inserted into any song.
Do you guys remember in Dupree's Paradise, the thing would start, there would be a vamp,
right,
and then it would be the right?
Mm-hmm.
That motif or theme,
yes,
he then used. We had to play it in triplets. Da 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 da.
And there was a slow motion version of it too. Da, 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 da,
yes,
da, da,
yes.
da, da.
And it became an actual fixture of other pieces. So you can see that this idea is a big part of Zappa, right? And remember I said that in Andy it lasts 2 beats, and it's 30 seconds, 16 notes. Well, that makes me think, how many notes are in the Dupree's lick? Also 16. Interesting. So what if we slow this part down? Can we hear what they're playing? Alright, what George plays is pretty dang close to that Dupree's lick. Enough of what he plays actually matches up, so I would say that this little section of chaos in Andy was actually an insert of the Dupree's lick. If we listen to a live version, it's even easier to tell. You can hear Ruth play it. So, I love what Andy takes from other compositions he wrote during this period. Breaking up phrases with random beats like in Don't You Ever Wash That Thing, or using this Dupree's lick to allow for a little bit of craziness, and break up a melody you may perceive as too sincere. As far as arrangements for this section, the one-size-fits-all band doesn't even play the bridge riff. We also get some of that sweet, sweet Zappa rhythm guitar. Starting in 79, the bands would add vocals on this section. Hey, if you had Ray White and Ike Willis standing around, you'd do the same. Now the riff continues, and we get a guitar solo over it. Zappa loves soloing over ostinatos and any set figures. I think a lot of that is due to the fact that it's hard to overplay if you're sticking to a written part. The space left in this riff leaves for a lot of fun for the drummer as well, an instrument we know Zappa loved interacting with. Some of the ones with Vinnie Colaiuta especially go off the rails in the best way. So Zappa takes 3 choruses, or 3 entire repeats of the riff, meaning it's 12 bars long. And that's probably the easiest way to divide this solo up in terms of how to talk about it. So let's listen to the first chorus. That's a pretty strong opening statement. Zappa's compositional approach and ear for melodies cannot be overstated. Of course, sometimes he'll go straight into guitar nonsense mode because, well, there is a time and place for everything, and it is earned a little bit later in the solo, especially as a contrast to this opening melody. But I really love how he starts off his solos. He's terrific at composing on the spot. This first chorus is so strong melodically that many people play it or play off of it to start off, as if this improvisation is really part of the composition itself. So the 3 factors we need to think about are what he's doing melodically, what he's doing rhythmically, and then what his sound is like. Like most of the melodic content over this A pedal, we see the notes of A Lydian, but I think Zappa is thinking B major. It may just be that he's really focused on the B mixolydian or B pentatonic home bass of the guitar, shape-wise that is. You can see he's immediately targeting a sort of B7, at least with where he lands on the strong beats. There's a sort of B sus2 arpeggio. Then these last 2 bars scream B mixolydian shape to me. In particular, the 4 notes of E, D sharp, B, and A. The reason is, this is a really easy and useful fretboard shape. But what's so catchy is what he sets up rhythmically. Starting on the and of 4, he sets up this rhythmic pattern of 8th, then dotted quarter. And 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and. Then after he establishes that pattern, he can develop it, as you see the same rhythmic values, but doubled here at the start of the second bar. So now a dotted 8th and 16th, instead of dotted quarter and 8th. And then again, here at the start of the third bar. The last very important part is the sound. Specifically, Zappa's use of the wah pedal. In case you don't know, a wah-wah pedal is an effect pedal. When you turn it on, it engages a filter, and using your foot, it allows you to move the frequency up and down. The name is an onomatopoeia, describing the sound it makes. Zappa has mentioned that he was unique in how he used the wah pedal, finding a position for it and usually keeping it there, or moving it only very slightly. So in this first chorus, you can hear he has it set to a lower position, really emphasizing that mid-range. You don't get to do the waka waka sound on every beat and stuff like that, but the trade-off is that when you keep it there for a bit and then just move it slightly to emphasize a phrase, it just explodes like you wouldn't believe. Case in point, the next chorus. Just by moving it slightly up, it takes off like a demented rocket. So this is the bulk of Zappa's wah technique here, moving it for emphasis on a phrase and not in a particular rhythmic up and down setting. And of course, what helps this explosion is the rhythm here, quite a change from the more sparse first chorus. He's really picked up the pace. There's nothing bigger than the odd eighth note. And notice that there's basically no two beats in a row that see the same rhythm. And that, to me, is what really contributes to the Zappa sound here. It'd be easy to take one sort of stock fast rhythm and ride that, but even here, we see the slight variations and changing of speed. For the first bar and beat 1 of the second is just 3 notes, A, B, and C sharp. This is an example of one of the 3 elements, melody in this case, taking a back seat to the other 2, rhythm and sound. And after he moves out of those 3 notes, it's still pretty clear that he's thinking B pentatonic or blues, the D naturals being a giveaway. And that's really what these 2 bars in particular are. It's that earned guitar pentatonic nonsense, which I'm using as an endearing term and not a putdown. It sounds twice as good because he built up to it in the first chorus. And then this last bar is playing with the notes C sharp and E, part of an A triad, before resolving to B. So let's hear the last chorus now. This one is pretty melodically simple. There's one stretch from beat 3 of the first bar to the and of 2 in the third bar, where again he only plays 3 notes, E, D sharp, and B, which is sort of like 4, 3, and 1 of B major. So where we saw the 3 notes of A, B, and C sharp with different rhythms here, we have the same thing here. Each time it kind of looks like he differentiates the phrases, usually with an E that's longer in duration, and then these answers are 16ths or 30 seconds. You can hear the creative ways he breaks up this pattern. The rest of this chorus is again standard B, Mixolydian, and pentatonic stuff, hence the D natural again. Notice where he lands on the strong beats, including ending the solo itself on B. So I don't think it could be any clearer how Zappa is approaching the solo section to Andy. Melodically, he's thinking of B as the tonal center, and using his standard blues and Mixolydian ideas. Rhythmically, we saw some 3-note patterns that he breaks up and makes interesting by varying that speed. And then for his sound, he uses the wah pedal in short and small bursts to shape his tone. So overall, notice how great the entire contour of this solo is. Starts with these beautifully short phrases, works up to the frenzy in the second chorus, the real climax, and brings it back down with great phrases to end it. One interesting detail about the first solo, before the record came out, it would go back to the bridge melody, then the second theme. 1979 was the only tour where Zappa didn't solo. Instead, Warren Cucurula would take the 3 choruses just like the record. So, as Zappa's solo ends, a familiar section reappears.
Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is it something that you can understand? Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is it something that you can understand? Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is it something that you can understand? Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is it something that you can understand?
Okay, so we get to the second theme again, this time uninterrupted by random chord hits, and now with lyrics.
Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is it something you can understand? You could take that 2 ways. I mean, it could be, directed at God. It's like, listen, seriously, I'm in trouble here. Do you understand? It's like, this is not given. This is not a done deal. I'm not in this without questions here. Listen up here. I need a sign. Or it could be directed to the audience. Sharpen up here. Just be with me. Stay with me on this one, because this is actually a rather important song, and I want you to hear it and understand it. My sense of it would be the latter, that it's a switch to the audience at this point, trying to say that this is something more profound than it might appear to be. It's, listen guys, do you understand what this is about? Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is it something you can understand?
If that's the direction it's going in, he's taking the time here to let the listener know they better, well, listen up. Say what you want about Zappa's lyrics, and plenty of you do. We do have to acknowledge the really brilliant and serious songs he wrote, in addition to the silly ones. So, this is our third and final appearance of the second theme, our second module of D. Lydian. And this part starts with Napoleon Murphy Brock.
Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is there something that you can understand? Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is there something that you can understand?
You can see we have some harmony on this line now. It sort of mirrors the first theme in how it started off straightforward with just one line, and then harmony eventually was added. This second theme kind of goes under an even crazier path, starting off without the actual pitches, then it's instrumental, and now we have the line with lyrics and some harmony. Napoleon uses his impressive range to get low and sing the root of the chord D, and then sings diatonic thirds on top of the melody, but it's not complete yet. Next up, we get the full 3-part harmony.
Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is there something that you can understand? Do you know what I'm really telling you? Is there something that you can understand?
Oh man, that is just so beautiful. It's a really great contrast. Napoleon has a lovely voice, but it's on the harsher side of the timbre spectrum compared to George, who sings like an angel. That's why the two of them blend so well.
Out of his Jeep on a 4-day run, looking for sleep in the Quaalude moonlight.
So you can see that these 3 lines come together to make triads, all diatonic to D. Lydian. After that, this is our very last go-around of the main theme. We hear guitar, bells, piano, and organ as usual, although they're sort of thrown at us a little bit differently, like so. Again, each time he mixes up who is taking what part, having fun and being creative with the texture and arrangements. You just never get the same exact thing every time. So we get one last iteration of the main riff. Then it's on to our last major section.
Have I aligned with a blown mind, wasted my time on a drawn blind? The blown mind would be, the people who had invented all this stuff in the first place. The earliest societies that we know anything about have come up with religious, quote-unquote, at least supernatural solutions, and that's a way of keeping the horror of randomness at bay. You're realizing that the people who came up with these stories were actually full of shit, and you've aligned with the blown minds of those people. Wasted my time on a drawn blind? That's just a kind of a fun metaphor, I think. The blind is down, and the blind is down. And there ain't nothing coming through that. There is no way that one can actually see through that blind. That's the blind that is impenetrable. There might be something on the other side. Who knows? We won't know till we get there. But on the other hand, to imagine that there's something there with no evidence is probably not the best way to go, and I think that's what that is about. The journey out of religious faith. But, you might say, why is Andy Devine in there? And this was the thing that I stumbled on for some time until one day I suddenly thought about it, not in terms of the printed word, but the actual sound of it. Andy Devine, and the divine. Aha! The divine had a thong rind.
Zappa certainly has a fondness for phonetic mutations, like Zoodalores, or ABC, among others.
And now we know that a thong rind is actually some kind of design fault that occurs when you wear these shoes that you thought were going to make you look cool, and you discover that between your toes you've got this disgusting excrescence that then spoils the look of your feet. This is a sort of an elaborate metaphor for how the universe goes wrong all the time. shit happens, basically. Andy Devine had a thong rind. Well, the divine had a thong rind. He's not perfect. You know, the idea that God is perfect and all his works are perfect and he creates man in his own image and all that just is blown out of the water by the thong rind. And who knows, it may be that Cal Schenkel claimed that he remembers the GTOs talking about having met Andy Devine and that he had a thong rind, and it could be that that also was something that came up in conversation. But I think the idea that this is actually literally about Andy Devine is pretty far-fetched. Number one, it's not written as if it were his name. Andy Devine, not written like Andy Devine. Clue number two, if it's and the divine, the whole thing just falls into place and it makes a consistent whole as a song about questioning the nature of a belief and God. I think that's pretty much it. God, that was long.
So the Andy Devine lyrics were not added until the record came out. It was, at first, just the Have I Aligned, Wasted My Time ones. So on the music here, this is our second and final appearance of our fourth module, C-sharp Dorian. Like the first time we have it, the melody starts off similarly, and then has a second phrase that veers off from that.
And the divine had a thong rind. It was sublime, but the wrong time.
You can see he's basically doing the same melody we saw previously in this section, just in his special Johnny Guitar Watson way. We get 2 rounds of that, with background vocals by Napoleon and George answering. The whole idea in these vocal backgrounds is the resolution to F-sharp 7, the 4 chord, either from above, like here, where it's B major to F-sharp, or from below, like here, chromatically sliding into it. Gotta give it up to Napoleon again for his awesome range here. What's also interesting to me is how it's mixed. On the right is the lowest and highest voice, while the left has the 2 in the middle. That low voice gives it a really unique texture.
Divine, right, so blind to the wrong kind.
Now the fixation around F-sharp 7 continues, as he introduces this line here that seems pretty F-sharp 7 centered, like playing on the 4 to 3 to 1 sort of thing. And hey, we saw that a lot earlier in Zappa's guitar solo, so we know that's a figure that he definitely likes. And just like in that solo, make sure you've got the wah pedal going, and bend that last note up from B to C sharp, like so. The bass keeps us fixed in C sharp for the first part though, so the harmonic rhythm is actually continuing. You can see his line starts on C sharp, as guitar and piano play the upper line. Then he finishes on F sharp and walks back up until it starts again. They hit this lick 4 times, and after a wicked glissando on piano, we get into these unison hits. Still C sharp minor to F sharp 7. So C sharp minor right on 1, and then on the E of 4 here, they're just chromatically coming up, down, and back up to F sharp 7. Super funky. Basically the same thing that the background vocals were doing previously. We've just had C sharp minor to F sharp 7 this whole time, so it's all about how Zappa breaks it up and makes it fun. And remember we talked about that bass drum pattern, the dotted 8th, 16th thing? We see that twice per bar now, as he still hits it on every beat. This just has so much bounce, and really drives this section. Although, it's not like Johnny Guitar Watson needs that anyway, since he comes in like an absolute freight train. I mean, just for his section, it transcends any technical information I could give you, right? There's nothing musically fancy with the notes, but the note choices, the sound of his voice, how he maneuvers between high and low, he's just an absolute gift. And we have to mention that, according to Zappa, this was all done in 1 take. Something we can dissect a little bit are these awesome George Duke fills. Here's the first. playing between F sharp and B before it resolves back to C sharp minor. And then this one, which plays on the F sharp to C sharp minor. And then this last one, he's just moving between the two triads of F sharp and G sharp minor. Alright, so we reach the last section of this song after this. It turns into a really great riff now. Zappa is just one of the best riff and ostinato writers, hands down. One thing we have to appreciate about that is how he uses them, though. Of course, there are entire tunes built off riffs, but what I love is when he casually throws one in and doesn't make it the focus of the entire tune. Something like this little insert in Penguin in Bondage. Or here in Echidna Zarf. Or staying on One Size Fits All, this part in San Bernardino. God, if I wrote anything like those, I would have milked that for all it's worth. He was just overabundant with creative ideas like that. So the first thing that may jump out to you is that it seems we've moved from our C sharp minor center to an F sharp minor one. We're coming from an F sharp 7 harmony, which has A sharps, and now A naturals are a huge part of this riff. So really it's just moving from the parallel major to the parallel minor. And that means we reach our last module, F sharp minor pentatonic. This has our fewest amount of notes, just 5. Here's the fantastic thing though. F sharp, A, B, C sharp, and E are all in A Lydian. There's no difference in notes. So the previous modules get farther away, but now we're back to the same notes we started with. It's almost like the middle modules have quote-unquote wrong notes, and it gets more out, but gets fixed and comes back home at the end, which is what makes this such a great form. But now, in our last module, which serves as our outro, we get a second guitar solo. Zappa has a history of that kind of thing, of course. I love that about his music. Who says you can't have 2 solos over different vamps in one tune? Although, are they really that different? So because he's moved to the center, this solo and the first solo both share the same exact notes despite being in different contexts. So you could play the second solo over the first vamp, and the first solo over the second vamp, and they both completely work. There are differences, however. Let's take it 4 bars at a time. All F sharp pentatonic here, and we're really getting into the blues side of Zappa. Lots of bends, especially ones that emphasize that flat 5 of C when he bends from B to C sharp. We call that the blue note. Also, we have to realize how important Zappa's right hand is here, including when he doesn't use it. So much of this is slurred, meaning Zappa does not pick every note, especially in phrases like these. But he's really coming out swinging, and very much setting the bar with these blues guitarisms. This is very greasy, you know? And it goes without saying that the wah also plays a huge influence in this solo as well. Let's hear the next 4. Alright, so it's pretty easy to hear and identify this one little phrase, the bend up from B to C sharp and then E and back down. In the last two bars, you can see how they move contrary. The first bar, he's moving down completely stepwise in F sharp minor pentatonic, and note the great use of C natural here. And in the second, he's moving up the scale, complete with slurs and another chromatic note of F natural in this slide. Notice too that it sounds like the wah goes lower as his notes do, meaning it gets darker around the low notes, and he flips that up a little bit as he goes higher, giving it a brighter sound. So here's the next four. He's really just wailing on a minor third, but I have to point out the fun in him repeating just the note of A here, right? But also, it's a nice contrast from the previous guitar blues nonsense that we got. Now, what's so great about this bend is how he hits the C natural first, pulls off, and then bends above to C sharp. The last bar is filled with more bluesisms. This in particular is a very used blues guitar cliche that goes root, flat 7, 5, and then bends between the 4, flat 5, and minor third. So let's hear the last four now. This last chorus strikes me as very important rhythmically more than any other element, and it's because of this pattern he plays around with. First playing the E and of beat 1, then 2/8 the next beat. He does that again in beat 3, then beat 4 does 8th then 2/16, a slight variation. In the second bar he continues the pattern. It starts the same in the first beat and then sees 8th and 2/16, but for the last two beats, see another stepwise descent with a blue note thrown in there. Bar 3 starts with the same pattern again, but has a different answer to it, just like all the other times. And then the very last bar is really all about the bend between the 4th, flat 5, and 5 again. Have I mentioned that this solo really shows off Zappa's blues guitar tendencies? And as he spills a little bit over, it sounds like Zappa may have gotten so into it that he forgot the tune was ending here. Still sounds great though. So all in all in this one we get blues cliches and really fun rhythmic patterns. It's easy to compare and contrast with the first solo. They both rely heavily on pentatonic and blues-based shapes, and both are so influenced by his wah sound. But the context, specifically the rhythm section figures, set them apart in a really specific way. With the openness of the Andy riff, his phrases are really flowing, but the F-sharp minor riff leads to what I would call boxier rhythms. You can fit them in neatly. Not that it's worse in any way, it's just Zappa is being more appropriate in how he's reacting to the musical situation he's in. But he rips either way. And as this ends and we hear more percussion and Johnny makes his last remarks, there we have the whole tune. Okay, so originally in the first arrangement of this tune, it returns to the Andy riff, but still with the funk section changes, or just with an F sharp underneath. Then this little vocal line comes in. Oh man, what an awesome little part that was. Then we have a little drum fill you might recognize. So that served as the transition to the fast version of Florentine Pogun. Or just works it into an ending. It still remained even after Zappa had separated them in the set list, and even though the tune itself had slowed down. After that, in 79, it would segue right from the last riff into Inca Roads. In 1980, Andy was usually the last song of the set, so Zappa would introduce the band again, and then they would end it, usually with Steve Vai taking a quick solo.
Mike, Tommy, Steve, Vinny from Pittsburgh, Arthur, Bob, Ray, thank you, good night.
And finally, in 1988, it was again part of this one-size-fits-all medley, where we see the transition to Inca Roads. So, that was a lot. But man, does this song really show a lot of what Zappa was about. We saw how Zappa treats Lydian, where he outlines the major 2 chord over the 1. He can even build off that by applying different scales and sounds to that 2 melody, like how we see a D natural in the first theme. This leads to another major aspect. The blues is always present in Zappa's music. That D natural is just the tiniest little fraction of it, but you take it out and you have a completely different melody. And of course, there is a literal blues section. But maybe most importantly, Zappa's biggest influence, Johnny Guitar Watson, shines so beautifully on this song. Zappa pays tribute to his other most significant influence, Edgar Varese, by having this percussion texture fill out the sound in parts of the song. In addition to borrowing from those two, he also borrows from himself. He takes the technique of random pauses between phrases from Don't You Ever Watch That Thing, and he takes just the literal phrase from Dupree's Paradise and puts it in the most sensitive section of his song. And on the other side, I'm so impressed with the depth of the lyrics here. It brings my mind to this interview he did in 1968. Zappa talks about God, saying, his packaging might be a little bizarre for you to understand. And he brings up the concept of the big note, saying that was the closest he could come to describing what he thought of God. In the end, you can obviously make of this entire thing what you will, but hey, you have to give it to Zappa for this unbelievable album, One Size Fits All.
I think there's a case to make that very few of the albums as they are released are sort of complete and whole in themselves. Obviously there's some kind of conceptual thread to many of them, and some more than others. You know, Joe's Garage, Thingfish, they are clearly put together with an overarching theme that sort of connects the songs. And then you have albums like, say, Burnt Weenie Sandwich, which are sort of beautifully constructed units that bookended by, you know, a couple of doo-wop numbers, and then there's a sort of a wholeness to them. The thing about One Size Fits All to me is that right from the get-go, it's a collection of songs that seem to cohere thematically in a way that few of the other albums really do. And that's what makes it special to me, apart from, more importantly perhaps, the fact that it's an absolutely crack studio album with a crack studio band. I mean, it's just that, together with the fact that it has such an overarching, coherent, consistent theme, is perfect. Definitely my go-to album, I would say.
Thanks again to Simon for sharing not only his insight and wisdom, but his wonderful story and relationship with Frank, too.
They say never meet your heroes. Well, he wasn't disappointing. He was as funny and as sharp and as all the things that I wanted him to be. He was like that. But people who walked in and out, of which there were many into his orbit that I happened to be around and observe. He was so encouraging and so giving of praise and so helpful to people in that way. And it's an unusual thing for someone in his position to be so encouraging and praising. I thought it was yet another sort of sign of what a great person he was.
Thank you again for watching. Simon is truly brilliant beyond words and completely unique. I really consider myself so lucky that Simon will answer my emails anytime I ask him, hey, what's this song about? Not to mention, he's just a wonderful friend. The exact kind of person you can easily see Zappa wanting to keep in his orbit. Now, for his stuff to check out.
If anybody is interested in further exploring the theme of language and religion, I happen to have a book out called Speech, How Language Made Us Human. In fact, some of you may have seen one of Tyler's other productions called So Why Can't Your Dog Talk Anyway, which you might like to check out after this. It's an indirect result of my relationship with Frank in some ways, because he sort of took me aside and said, now listen, you should be getting into semiotics. Semiotics is the thing. I didn't even know what semiotics meant. The idea that Frank Zappa was taking me aside and saying, you should get into semiotics, you know, that's the future. Obviously never forgotten that he said that to me, but the book I ended up writing is a kind of a meditation on all that. If that sounds of interest, it is now available on Amazon and at all good bookshops and anywhere else you might choose to find it.
But don't just take his word for it. If you want, you can follow me on Instagram. It also helps if you like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.